Good evening. Welcome to Chelmsford's newest public affairs show, Chasing the Facts. I'm Sam Chase, your host, and our guest for today's show is Glenn Diggs, who is chairman of the Board of Selectmen here in Chelmsford. Good evening, Glenn, and welcome to the show.
Good evening.
What I'd like to do is start a little bit by giving the folks some of your background and some of the reasons how you got into local politics and why you chose to run for the Board of Selectmen. So if you could just give us a little bit of a brief bio, that would be helpful.
Sure. I moved into the town approximately in 1998 when I married my current wife. She was a librarian at the time in Chelmsford. She eventually became director of the Chelmsford school system libraries. And there was some difficulty in the school system a while back, and some curriculum coordinators were dismissed. There was a lawsuit by the union in getting involved because they said it was not done by the rules. And at that time, I wanted to learn a little bit more about everything, so I started going to all the school committee meetings, the planning board meetings, the Board of Selectmen meetings. And after a while, I got some feel for how things were done and sometimes not done. And so I was approached after some time to consider running for the Board of Selectmen, and I agreed. And one of the people that brought me forward was Judge Dixon, and explained that these people are not mystics, but they are people who try to do right by the town. And so I ran and was successful. And this is my third year, and I have decided not to seek re-election in April. I have other parts of my life, and my wife would like to travel. We own an RV, motorized home, and if it's not next year, it'll be the following year. And Board of Selectmen is a part-time job that is a full-time job. Mm-hmm. You can never go to enough meetings. You can never learn enough to make all the right decisions all the right time. So if I'm not here, I can't be doing that.
And I think that's a very good decision. Now, when you first ran, had you given any thought to limiting yourself to one term, or was that a more recent
No, I played it by ear. There were times that I felt that I would do it longer. I enjoy doing it. I think I do a pretty good job of it. I try to do my homework. And my wife has since semi-retired. She still works in the library field. She's in charge of the library school program for Salem State College. But she can do that from anywhere in the world. It's all online. Mm-hmm. And I'm still working, so I would have to stop my full-time job. And it might happen in June. It might happen the following June. I'm not sure. But in either case, I would not be a full-time selectman if I were to do that.
Oh, good enough. I will say one thing. Of course, I've watched your career, your political career, very closely, and you and I haven't always agreed on issues, but I will say that you've been, in my opinion, you've been one of the most impactful selectmen that we've had on the board in many years, and in two areas in particular. The first area is economic development. Now, this was something that was on the back burner before you became elected to the Board of Selectmen. It was started with planning department and so forth. But I have to say that you, more than any of the other selectmen, drove the issue of trying to enhance the commercial tax base here in town, and ultimately that led to the hiring of a full-time person, Lisa Maroney, who is now our Economic Development Director. So could you just take a moment and maybe explain a little bit about how you became interested in that and why you drove that issue so forcefully?
Well, if you work within the town, you recognize that funds are limited. The state is always putting mandates on us that are unfounded. You can only create more money by increasing taxes, or by getting more money from the state, or cutting back on services. Well, cutting back on services, we have already trimmed way back from what it was before the downturn in the economy, and have kept it at that level. The state is not giving us any more money, although there's supposed to be some discussion about the Chapter 70 formula by the governor. I think it was going to be today, but I haven't heard what was brought forward. But that's going to be a long road to hoe because there are towns that get more money, and they're not willing to give it up, and you know how those reps should be voting. Or to increase economic development and bring in more revenues for the town. And that seemed to be really the only place we had to go. So I campaigned strongly for that. I campaigned for the overlay for the 129 area. I went to the Economic Development Commission very early on and argued for an economic development director. And at that time, they had no interest in it. They were looking solely at the changing of the zoning out there. But eventually they saw that once that was done, there really was a need for someone. Previously, Evan Belansky, who is the Economic Development Director for the town, really was wearing two hats. And the hat of a seller of the town really was, I didn't feel, was the right fit for him. He's a great in terms of detail and zoning and the law, but doing this other part didn't seem to be his forte. And by splitting that, I think his work has grown exponentially in terms of grant money. The town is bringing in a tremendous amount of grant money, which he's mainly the focus of when it comes to that. And at the same time, Lisa's done a great job in courting businesses, courting economic development at the state level, at the local level. So it's been a win-win situation for everyone. Was adding $100,000 salary to the payroll, but with the grant money that Evans brought in, it's, I think, more than compensated for that. And I think it's part of it is the fact that the changing the rules in the town in terms of economic development has perhaps made some people at the state realize that, excuse me, giving money to Chelmsford is giving money to a town that's trying to help themselves, rather than a town that just says, gimme. Excuse me.
That's a very good point.
So I think it's all tied in together.
And as you know, I happen to be on the Economic Development Commission and become very well acquainted with Lisa and the work she's doing. And I have to say, I'm very, very impressed with her enthusiasm and her work ethic. And since she's been on board, we have filled up close to 1 million square feet of space in Chelmsford that has been previously vacant. So the efforts are starting to bear fruit, and I think the zoning changes that we saw there and potentially the zoning changes that we see on the Route 40 corridor will also help the town as well. The other thing that you drove forcefully within the last year was the implementation of a split tax rate here in town that we hadn't had for about 20 years. The history is that the town adopted a split tax rate in the late 80s, and we had it in place for about 7 or 8 years, and then they went back to a single rate, and we stayed at a single tax rate for about 20 years.
Thank you.
And this year, that was an issue. A year ago, the selectmen took a vote, and for the first time in 20 years, the vote was not unanimous. The vote was 3 in favor of maintaining a single rate and 2 in favor of adopting a split rate. And you were in the minority in that particular vote. And then would you care to tell us what happened next after that vote was taken? How did we get to the point where we are now with the split rate?
Well, because the vote was split, there was it wasn't the kind of decision that's 100% one way or the other. It's a close look at both sides because it is a complicated issue. But in simple terms, it's just, do you want to split the tax rate so that residences will pay lower taxes and that businesses will pay higher taxes? So the board got together and we decided that we would put a non-binding question on the town ballot as to whether or not the split rate should be adopted. The Board of Selectmen makes the final decision on many things, but in many cases, we need guidance. And there's no better guidance than the residents of Chelmsford as a whole siding on one side or the other. And we expected that it would be a relatively close vote. There was a lot of push on the business community coming forward, arguing what was against it. And there was talk from among the Board of Selectmen and others about the things that would come about successfully if we did it. Eventually, it was approved by the town by about a 2/3 vote. And
65-35, that was
Right.
the split.
And so then every year we vote on it, and it will be done again this December. It only stands, whatever the rule is decided, it only stands for 1 year. The state has you vote on it every year. And at our vote in December, after putting together a committee that met regularly every week for months and exhausted themselves and produced a report that was ridiculously successful and encompassing compared to any town that had ever done anything like this before in Massachusetts. We voted again, and this time it came out 3-2 to split the tax rate. Then we had to decide at what point would we split the tax rate. We were allowed to do up to 1.5 or 50% more higher taxes for business. And at the end, we decided to make it 1.27, which is 1/3 as much as our neighbors in Billerica and Lowell.
What
which
was
are at
the, what was the
175.
rationale for the decision on 120? Why not 120? Why not 130? Why did you pick 127?
Well, I think the decision was that we wanted to make it meaningful, but not burdensome on the businesses. It was not as a punishment or a decision that was based on fact, because there is no facts on this. No one can say, one of the arguments, the main argument against was it will chase businesses out. You know, you have worked hard for economic development, meaning the board, the planning board, the town manager, the economic development offices. Everyone was pushing for economic development. And he didn't come along and go the opposite way. And this doesn't make any sense, because you could detract from businesses coming into the town by forcing them to pay more taxes. And the people who voted for it just looked at it and could find no compelling report or study that said this, in fact, will happen. And, you know, in some ways, it's a gut decision. And we asked the assessor's office to come back twice a year. He makes a presentation every December about it and where things are, but we asked them to come back in June and kind of track businesses coming, going, or the number of employees, some yardstick to show how it's doing. Are we losing a lot of business? Are we attracting businesses? To get some feel for that. I know that I attended a meeting of the Economic Development Board that you were at, and there was a presentation made by someone who's interested in doing some activity in the town, and that came along well after we voted for the split tax rate. So my initial reaction so far is that we were right. You know, I don't have a crystal ball. It may prove wrong, but, you know, talking about what Lisa's doing, and I go to meetings, and everything seems to be glowing. You know, it takes years to grow the economic base of the town up. But it seems to be flowing in the right direction, and that's what you're looking for, heading in the right direction, because for years and years, we weren't going anywhere.
Well, I think you're right, and I think your instincts are absolutely correct on the economic development side of it. I think relative to the split tax rate, however, there are many studies out there, and as you probably know, I've spent a great deal of time myself studying this issue, hundreds and hundreds of hours over several years trying to understand it. And I think I have to largely agree with the conclusions of the study committee that you referenced. Essentially is that there are just too many economic factors that influence a decision to stay, not to stay, to leave, to start up, or whatever. Certainly a level of taxation that a company pays, whether it be property taxes or other types of taxes, is certainly a factor in the decision. But there are so many other factors, economic factors, that come into play. It's very hard, as you say, to isolate and to come down to a conclusion of, yes, it always impacts, no, it never impacts, that kind of thing.
Right.
So I think that's
if you were to
correct.
use Westford, for example, as an illustration, Westford had a very contentious situation in the town concerning a new asphalt plant. Mm-hmm. And I have to believe that part of the decision from the development side of it is that right beside where they intend to put it, there's a tremendous amount of granite which can be used for aggregate for the asphalt. if they were looking in Revere to put a plant where there is no aggregate, that would be a major decision, even if the town even if they had a no tax rate split.
Right.
And they had a humongous tax rate split. There's so many variables that go into that decision
Right.
that you can't say one thing or another. So the idea was to provide, it ended up as providing about a 6% tax benefit to the residents.
Well, let's actually, I've got some examples here. Let's take a look at the actual effects of this particular decision, because I think it's, and I attended almost all of the study committee meetings and saw an awful lot of information about academic studies and possibly the effect goes this way, the effect goes that way. But I think it's always good at the end of the day to take a look at real examples and see what the real effects are. So we can do that. We have some slides here. You can take a look at the monitor. Now, the situation in Chelmsford is as you see on the first slide. Fiscal year 2018, we had a single tax rate for which covered both residential properties, commercial and industrial and personal property, and that rate was $17.96 per thousand of valuation. So as Glenn said in this latest decision by the Board of Selectmen, we now have a split tax rate in 2019. So the residential taxpayer pays $16.35 per thousand value. Commercial and industrial property owners pay $22.21, and the personal property tax is a little bit lower. And the reason that the commercial, industrial, and personal property are not the same is because the board, in addition to splitting the rate, they voted to adopt a small commercial business exemption, which shifts some of that value back onto commercial and industrial. So those rates are a little bit different. Now, if we can go to the next slide, let's take a look and see what the effect is on 3 residential properties in Chelmsford. And I'm going to use my own property as an example, and I picked that to lend some credibility to my discussion here. This is my property. This is all public information, so we're not giving away any secrets. And my property value happens to be very, very close to the average single-family residence value, so it's a good example. So last year, I paid $7,019 in tax, a little over $7,000. This year, because of the split rate, I'm going to pay $6,802. So I'm going to save $217 versus what I paid last year. Now let's go to the next slide and take a look at a higher value residence in Chelmsford. And I think we could all agree that in the $500,000 to $600,000 residential property value, that's a significant number of homes in Chelmsford that fall into that category. So you see there what the effects would be, or are actually, not would be, these are actual numbers.
Sure.
Okay, so that person is going to save $257. So as the value of the property goes up, you're going to save a little bit more. And let's take a look at the last slide for residential. This is a high value, what I would call a high value residence. And this person here is going to save $553 versus what he paid last year. So now let's take a look at a small business. Next slide. This is a small business, and I'm not going to give out the name, but this is a real property in Chelmsford Center. Small business that happens to be eligible for the small commercial exemption. So you see the values there. So without the small commercial exemption, that property owner would pay an extra $2,700 a year in taxes. But because the selectmen enacted the small commercial exemption, their increase will only be a little over $1,600. So that small commercial exemption saves that property owner about 40% of what he would have paid without the exemption. So that's a very, very meaningful thing that the board did.
Wasn't there about 160 or so small businesses that qualify?
About that we know of. There may be a few more as
And there are
we
about
go along.
450 overall businesses approximately?
Close to 500. That's right. So that's the effect. That's the effect on that particular property owner. So he pays an extra $2,700 a year. Now let's go to the last slide. Now we'll look at a small business that's near the center But because that property value is over $1 million, which is the threshold for the small commercial exemption, that particular property is not eligible. So that property owner is going to bear the full brunt of the split. So in 2018, he paid $21,694. In 2019, he's going to pay $28,629. So his tax is going to go up by almost $7,000 versus what he paid last year. So I guess the question is my $217 a year's tax saving worth taxing that small business owner an extra $7,000 a year?
And my answer is yes.
Okay.
When you look back at the reason for the split, there are basically three reasons, legitimate reasons why taxes are split. One is just because we want to do it and we want to look good to the taxpayers, all right? And that's kind of called the political solution. Not very valid. It's just subjective, and people like to say it's because people like to get reelected. Well, here's one that did it, and I'm not getting reelected. The second reason is that there's a difference in services that the business community is using as opposed to the residential community, whether it be police or fire or some kind of services within the town or whatever. And I don't think there is that disparity between the percentages that are involved. But the third reason...
Let me just back up. So to follow up on that point, so you're saying that in some cases a community might try to justify a split rate on the premise that the business is using services more than the...
Yes.
Okay, but you don't find that to be the case in
I don't think
Chelmsford?
that's the case.
Okay.
But the third reason is that the overall net aggregate of the taxes paid by the residential community versus the same number on the business side gets out of whack in terms of percentages because, and we feel that, personally I felt, that was because the residences in Chelmsford have grown exponentially in value compared to the businesses in town. Now, it's not to say that the businesses did anything bad, but as the bulk of the dollars from the residential side keeps growing exponentially, they are paying more and more of the bulk of the expenses of the town. And that is a legitimate reason to try to put that percentage back into balance. And that's what we tried to do. We didn't try to do it from a standpoint of let's make it 1.5 and we'll just, bowl them over because we feel that it's that far out of whack. But it is out of whack, and that I hope that the boards going forward in the years to come look at that, and if our economic development activity is successful, and I believe it will be successful, then that split tax rate should come down in percentage. There'll be a track there to say that they are now paying more and more of the bulk of the town's services, and when we get to a point where we feel it's back to parity, it should go away.
So you and I would agree with you in terms of the logic behind that. Over the years, you may have a situation where the residential properties appreciate at a faster value than the commercial does, and that creates a natural shift of where the residential property taxpayers are paying a larger share of the tax levy. Okay.
Correct.
And I'm just kind of restating what you said.
You're one of the assessors,
okay.
so you got the right lingo.
Right. I'm putting it in a little bit more precise language, and what you're saying is what the board did this time is they attempted to make an adjustment for the fact that situation has been occurring over the last 4 years. Now, from the time Paul Cohen was on the board for a period of about almost 6 or 7 years after he came, it was the reverse. The commercial properties were appreciating at a faster value. So you anticipate a situation where if that happens again, a future board legitimately, because that was the basis that your board voted on, would actually roll that split back. Maybe not bring it back to a single rate, but might take it from 127 back to 120 or 150, whatever the number justified.
It's been said that once you go in one direction, you can't go in the other direction because the pressure by the residents would be too great. The pressure might be great, but the Board of Selectmen's job is to do what's right for everyone,
Correct.
Businesses and residents.
Correct.
And if it goes in that direction, then that split rate should go in the same direction. it was created for that reason, it should go back for the same reason.
Oh, and I would agree with you on that, and I thank you for that explanation, because I know you did give an explanation when the vote was taken, but emotions were running high, and I think, we'd had a very contentious couple of hearings, and I'm not sure that your message got through then as clearly, I think, as it's gotten through right now. So thank you for articulating that. We have a few minutes left, and unfortunately, we probably could have covered a few more things. But I'd like to hear your brief opinion on the Route 40 situation. What do you think should happen there?
All right, I was brought into it early on. To tell you the truth, I was brought into it when I was running for office. As I mentioned, George Dixon was kind of my mentors in terms of bringing me into the town politics. And he had mentioned that there was a development that he was aware of that was going to be a 40R project, meaning it's a residential project, rental. Mm-hmm. Works kind of like a 40B, but in a 40R, all of the units would qualify for the town's low-income quota. At the same time, the number of services that they would have to pay for, tying into water, tying into sewer, would maybe bring $1 million of income out of the blue to the town. At the same time, the school department was talking about to do all-day kindergarten was going to take $1 million. So they seem to be a match. Do this project, all the money's given to the schools, we get all-day kindergarten, it's a win for everyone. But as you know, the school department went off on another tangent and had a tremendous problem, and eventually it required many more millions to do successful kindergarten, which we did. But the 40R project, which was the small project on Route 40, grew in scope in terms of, well, if we're going to do this there, let's do this and this and this, because it's kind of a mess up there. Mm-hmm. And it's getting to be more and more of a commercial cut-through to Westford and so forth. And so it was brought to light. Someone made offers to a lot of the property owners up there, giving them more money than they otherwise would get for the property. And if I lived on that street, I'd want out, because it's just getting brutal up there in terms of the traffic. And Westford just widened their road, so they're going to target that area. So the net result is that I feel
it's almost become a de facto commercial zone
area,
anyway.
but it's
right.
not zoned such, and
Correct.
It doesn't have the planning board's overseeing of the whole project.
So we have to wrap up. We've got just a little over a minute.
So I think it should be created similar
So-
to the 129 area.
Mm-hmm.
I think there should be a buffer zone on the south side where the residences of the newer homes have an additional 80 to 100 feet of unrestricted development, that it just stays and looks woods the way it is now. Because they've already got an 80-foot right-of-way through there for National Grid, although it was clean cut. That gives them 180 feet from the back of their property line where nothing could be. And I think it's fair to everyone. They get their say, because they said we had no say initially. They got their say. I think it's a win situation, and I'm all for it. That the planning board needs to control it, and if some of them are against Cox, who's the developer up there, I don't have any doubt the planning board will see that it's done right or it's not done at all.
Very good. And again, I guess I find myself in agreement with you on the Route 40 situation. Again, I think that's a de facto situation. It's been a long time coming, and I'm glad to see we're finally moving in that direction. We've just got a very few seconds left, and in the time we have left, I want to thank you very much for your service on the board. As I said at the beginning of the show, I think whether you disagree or agree with the things that Glenn Diggs has done, you have been a very energetic and a very impactful selectman, and I believe that you have tried to consider all points of view during your tenure, and you have tried not to favor one constituency over another, and you have tried to consider what's best for the town, and have tried to take the long view. And I thank you for that, and I thank you for your service, and I wish you and Valerie well in hopefully what will be your soon to be realized retirement. Thank you very much,
Well,
Glenn.
thank you, and I'd just like to say that it's been an honor knowing you. I met you when I started running. You helped me with questions that I had when I was running, and the town.